Well, over the last day and a half or so, you've heard a lot about the twin catalyst Nourish 2050 initiative. We're learning a lot about the connection between diet and human health, and we're going to talk about that during this segment. Diet is now the #1 cause of mortality and morbidity. 1 in 5 deaths globally is related in some way to our diet. Diabetes alone, which we know is strongly correlated with diet and lifestyle, is slated to be a $2.2 trillion problem by 2030, which, if that were a GDP, would make it the next G8 country. And obesity is one of the top 3 social burdens created by humans. COVID is only underscoring the nature of this challenge and the urgency with which we should act. And while we know a lot about the importance of diet, we're only just now coming to begin to understand better how our bodies process nutrition, what we eat, and the mechanisms by which they operate. So today I'm joined by 2 very incredible women who are trying to make change in that area and are leveraging the power of digital technologies to do so, to accelerate progress. Sally Cudmore, who has been working on our food as medicine effort with the Twin Catalyst, is with the APC Microbiome Institute in Ireland, one of the world's leading microbiome institutes. And Lydia Afman, who heads up Me, My Diet, and I, a program at Wageningen University, is working on a digital twin to predict human response to food, but more on that later. Sally, I want to begin with you in this conversation. We hear a lot about the microbiome and its relationship to human health. What are we now coming to learn about the relationship and connection between the microbiome and human health? Can you tell us?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I mean, the microbiome is an absolutely fascinating area of research that's grown hugely in the last number of decades. A single human has about 100 trillion microbes living in it, so more microbial cells than human cells, mainly bacteria and viruses, but also fungi and parasites. And they outnumber the human by at least an order of magnitude. Collectively, these microbes that live in symbiosis with the human have about 200 million genes, which is many multiple times of a human, which is about 20,000 genes. And they can't live with each other. This human and its microbes live in a mutual symbiosis. These microbes live primarily in the gut, in the colon, where they help with digestion of our food, but they also produce metabolites and antimicrobials that help them gain a competitive edge over each other, but also helps then the human host. So this microbiome plays a very important part as well in training our immune system, and very important in that context in health. And when the composition of the microbiome gets a little bit out of kilter, it can predispose people towards immune-mediated disorders, things like chronic inflammatory conditions, Crohn's disease, for example, metabolic syndrome, which includes diabetes, but also obesity, respiratory illnesses, and so on. And also, I think a really fascinating area recently is the whole 3-way communication between the brain, the gut, and the microbiota, which was unheard of really about a decade ago. We know, for example, that germ-free mice that have no microbes have an exaggerated response to stress. Also, if you look at other animal models, stressed mice, for example, they show depletion of certain types of bacteria, which has a knock-on effect in some of the pathways, for example, like the serotonin pathway. Serotonin is known as the happy hormone. So if you've less serotonin, you tend to be a little bit more depressed. So Ted Tyne in our group has shown, for example, that a depressive phenotype can be passed on through fecal microbiota transfer. He's also shown that a Mediterranean diet can really help people with depressive symptoms. So all of these are pointing to an important connection between the microbiome and health. Interesting.
Wow. So really the microbiome has relevance for depression, for autism, spectrum disorders. That's incredible. I'd love to build on that question. And so what are we finding now about the link between food and nutrition and the microbiome and human health? Can you just expound on that a little bit?
Certainly. I mean, I suppose the one thing that's very important is that really the food sector, the whole sector, they really can't afford to ignore the microbiome. Food and health are really linked, they're inextricably linked, and often this is via the microbiome. The complexity of the microbiome, the complexity of the chemical composition of food, and their interplay is really, I suppose, one of the next big areas that we have to try and tackle and to try and understand it. I suppose it's fair to admit we don't really know what is a healthy microbiome. It differs in everybody. Your healthy microbiome is different from mine. It'll depend on your diet, on your stage of lifestyle, the way you were born as an infant, and so on. And so trying to understand all of these complex interactions are very difficult. At a societal level, over the last century in particular, our diet has changed dramatically. We've got a diet today that's much higher in fat, it's higher in sugars, for example, it's much lower in fiber. And all of these are having an effect as well on our health individual. For example, we know that today that humans are only eating about half as much fiber as they should have. And again, fiber really is contributing largely to good health. And a lot of these non-communicable diseases, things like obesity, inflammation, and so on, are very much linked to our diet. And we now know that there's an increasing role of the microbiome. Studies with immigrants that have moved to the US and have changed their diet have had a knock-on change in their microbiome, which has ultimately led to a generation or two later increasing levels of, for example, obesity. We've done a similar study in Ireland with endemic traveller groups in Ireland in, I suppose, the same geography and ethnic backgrounds. And again, the things that's been changing here has been the diet, and that again has led to this particular group, who have a much less industrial microbiome, actually having less chronic inflammation.
This seems enormously complex, and so the data sets are huge, and the complexity of interaction between lifestyle and urbanization and migration patterns, as you talked about. Talk a little bit about how the field of microbiome research is being affected by exponential technologies, artificial intelligence, and genomic sequencing and others. How has it changed in the last 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I suppose the huge change has been simply the sheer amount of data that we're generating. There's been very significant advances in sequencing technologies. We can now, I mean, initially we had to grow the bacteria to know what was present. Now we can actually sequence them. We can sequence them to know what's there, but also exactly what the function is that they're doing. And you might remember that I've mentioned that each individual person's microbiome is about 200 million genes, but then you can overlay on top of that data about their diet, about their stage of life, antibiotic usage, clinical data, geography, longitudinal data when you're doing studies over a long time. So you're beginning to get a sense of the sheer amounts of data. Then combine, along with the sequence data, other types of data such as metatranscriptome, metaproteome data, metabolome data. So I suppose one of the big areas in the field is just grappling with these sheer amounts of data. Another problem is the lack of interoperability of the data sets. Sure. So one of the things that's been set up to address this actually is last year, the National Microbiome Collaborative was established, funded by the Department of Energy, to try and make the data what's called FAIR. This stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So it has two strategic priorities. One are to try and develop a distributed data framework to democratize this data, make it available to everybody, and also to enable a shared ownership of this data through collaborative partnerships and community engagement globally. I mean, really, this has to be something that we address across the world. Yeah, so all of these things, together with sort of machine learning and so on, are really starting to move the field on.
Wow, well, that's really incredible, and I can imagine that these barriers are significant, and it's going to open up probably new questions about data privacy and all of that as well. Lydia, I'd love to transition to you as we talk about big data and as we talk about its role in artificial intelligence. You're a nutrition research at a university that's considered by many to be the world's leading nutrition and agriculture, food and agricultural school, Wageningen. And at the university, you're developing something called a digital twin that's going to predict human response to food. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what exactly is a digital twin?
Yes, thanks, Scott. Well, my group is especially working on the interaction between diet and the development of obesity-related diseases, like the cardiovascular diseases and diabetes type 2. And we have done many studies in the past, many dietary intervention studies. And there was always one thing that stood out, and that was that people are not responding the same. So even though you could find an effect of diet, there were still people that are responding differently. And especially with the use of omic techniques, like the ones that Sally was mentioning, like sequencing, but also other techniques that we're using, transcriptomics, metabolomics, we really saw that there was a big difference in response to diet between persons. And that's actually the basis of this digital twin. In this digital twin, we're going to use all this data and all these data points to try to predict how a person would respond to a diet or to food. And with that, we would like the digital twin is actually a kind of algorithm that we will build. And with this algorithm, we will then predict how a person would respond to diet. And also for that, we use a lot of time points, like all this data, because we have done comprehensive phenotyping of all these studies. So we measured a lot. Let's say, fat distribution, where is the fat located in the liver, but also blood pressure, all kind of markers. And then you already have 1 million data points that you are using, and then 100 million data points that you're using. And if you then add the omic techniques, that even just add up so much more. So that will really increase the number of time points that you're using.
Wow. So, wow, 100 million data points and being able to predict human response is pretty incredible. So what do you hope that this digital twin effort will be able to accomplish over time? As I'm listening to you, what I'm imagining is sort of an algorithm that can understand based on who I am and maybe my genetic profile, my genetic makeup, my microbiome profile, where I live, what kind of lifestyle I employ in my life. That is it going to be able to tell me potentially the kinds of foods that I should eat that would be beneficial for me? Is that the goal?
Yeah, that's actually what we're aiming for. We're aiming for that to develop this algorithm, and then in the end to develop an app, for example, an app in which we can give you personal dietary advice. So that will really pave the way towards precision nutrition. And what is important here is that it doesn't stop with only the data that we have, but it will just continue to learn, and it will continue to develop. Because when you're using this app, what you do, you're also wearing all kind of wearables, kind of sensors, like sensors that can measure your blood glucose continuously, sensors that measure your physical activity, maybe your stress. And this will all be combined in addition to your dietary intake that you will record. And that will be combined, the feedback into the twin, your personal twin, and it will improve the prediction of the diet that is good for you.
Well, that's interesting because you said the word learn, which is, it's a hallmark of artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, is that they need a learning objective. And there's data that's being fed to it. So do you anticipate in the future that some of that data might be even user-generated? So I can imagine sensor data, I can imagine my microbiome or genomics, but what about my mood? What about my stress? What about my sleep? What about me feeding it information that perhaps I might be experiencing? Do you envision that might be part of that future state as well?
Yes, it's really expected. It's also giving your feedback yourselves. It will tell you, hey, if you do this. For example, you can say you can eat a certain food that gives you not a good response. But maybe when you have done physical activity, it doesn't matter for you, because then you have a good response. So it really matters what kind of data, what it really matters. It's very important to have all this data. And indeed, mood, this is also something that we're measuring and recording.
Wow. So, if we could build a model that could understand an individual's human response to dietary changes and how the body metabolizes nutrients, how could this lead to potentially broader societal change and societal impact? And what are the implications on society if we start to collect this mass amount of data and mobilize that data to be able to tell people what to do, how to eat, how to modify their lifestyle to improve health? What are the implications of that?
Yeah, well, at the moment, every country has its own dietary guidelines, and they look a lot like each other. But that is really mentioned to improve population health, and that's not specific for you. So what we hope to achieve is that you will, by using this app, because it's personally for you, your compliance will be better, and that will also improve your health. And if you can improve health of a lot of individuals, it will also improve population health. And because it's only an app, and you don't need any dietitian because it's done all automatically, it will also reduce the healthcare cost.
Okay, wow. Sally, maybe we can return full circle to you. What are your thoughts on that point? And specifically related to the microbiome, you mentioned earlier in your comments the word personalization and personalized nutrition, targeted nutrition. Do we really envision a world where we might have truly personalized dietary advice at the individual level?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, I do think that this is something that's feasible Not in the next 5 years. I think we're probably talking a little bit further out. I think probably within certainly a 5-year time frame, we could be looking at trying to give advice at sort of population level. There will be certain types of advice for elderly people who are maybe becoming frail, because we know that a lot of things like frailty and so on in the elderly are caused by an imbalance in their microbiota. Typically what starts to happen in an older person is they lose microbial diversity. So if we can help them to develop diets, or even if we can develop particular food products that will increase microbial diversity, it'll help prevent some of this decline in older age. And this is very tailored around trying to develop specific food products.
Wow, incredible. Well, all of this is super exciting, and the horizons, I can imagine, are just endless in terms of being able to take data like this and be able to mobilize that data to create dietary recommendations that actually improve human health and that allow me to, as a human being, to function with greater resilience. And so all of this relates very much to the Twin Catalyst journey we've been on. I mentioned that early on, and you've heard a little bit about that, and it is focused around nourishing the world to 2050, empowering human health through food.